listen to Anna Gavrilovic, university professor from Faculty of Agriculture from Zagreb. She will tell us more about the basic principles of microalgae cultivation. Anna, here you go.
Okay, yes. I will start from the history of algae cultivation. Why?
Hi, Hannah, sorry, I'm interrupting you. We don't see the shared screen. Can you try to share it again, please?
It is shared.
Okay, we can try
So,
again.
can you-
Somehow double.
Is it okay now?
Yes. I didn't.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So we were talking about parasites, and now I'm talking about basic principles of algae cultivation. What is something supposed to be without contaminants and parasites. And so I will start from history. Why? Because simply these people, some 150 years ago, when started, even 170, when it was published first report on algae culture, recognized some things or some basic principles that we still use now. I'll just mention some of them. So first book was published and it was called Algae Culture. They still didn't have continuous culture, but called it cultivation. Then in 1871, they started to use inorganic salt, what are sterilizers. They also used micropipettes for isolating algal cells and organic maceration, just as an addition to first inorganic cells. Used micropipette and microscope. So all what we are still using now in cultures. Then what to tell more? First report about pure algae cultures came in late 1890 actually, and 90s. So there were works on diatoms, cyanobacteria, and after that first fertilizer or media was developed, and it was A and B solution of mineral salts that are later bit changed, but these were first steps in algae culture. And they had problems. It was 19th century, actually they couldn't keep culture free from bacteria. Then in again the same century, as they couldn't find free culture, they started with the sterilization. So they mixed algae with nutrient enriched and sterilized solution. This is something why I started to talk about this, because when we have some stakeholders, some algae farmers for commercial purposes, we still don't know this, or we don't use. We all read this. There are many guides, but simply these principles are not used. I know that working group 3 had a survey, and we saw that we don't know basic environmental parameters, that we don't know chemical composition of the media or what is in the water. And when we come to sterilization or sanitation, doesn't matter how, who called. This is something what is not used in the industry. And that's why I started with the history, what was 100 years ago. And sometimes we behave that like, not behave, but we are finding some hot water that was already discovered. So they also started with carbon dioxide in that time, pure dishes for cultivation. So this was something about hygiene. And at the beginning of the 20th century, actually Moore published first summary of algae cultivation. Then in Great Britain, Harriet Chick, she actually presented work on chlorella and other species, but she tested algae for purity. What means in that time she tested contaminants, we called it contaminants. Now we came to parasites and other things, but actually all of them are contaminants. Then she also concluded they were more about fertilizer or salts for media, cultivation media. And in 1912, actually, they started to find also other environmental conditions that are important for algae. What was light, and Charlotta Terence discovered that the green forms of algae became colorless when grown in dark, but turn green again in light. And then we are coming to mariculture or aquaculture. In 1910, actually, they isolated in Great Britain or United Kingdom, Nelson and Allen isolated culture of Hetocerus, Skeletonema, Thalassiosira, that are among the other species. Why I'm mentioning this? Because these species were cultivated for years, and we are still cultivating them to feed marine larvae. And simply where they are used now, they not now. Since aquaculture hatcheries exist, these algae are farmed, and in aquaculture we need pure culture, what means we doesn't need contaminants at all. Why? Because you have on the first photo oyster larvae. They are 200-300 microns, and if we give them live feed that is contaminated with bacteria or algae that has some toxin, they are dead. So industry doesn't have from what to start. And then they are used for feeding of zooplankton that is used for fish larvae feeding. Besides this, we are also using it for broodstock in the hatcheries, shellfish or bivalve broodstock in the hatcheries. And anyhow, for broodstock, you don't need to be to have 100% sterile culture. There could be some bacteria because all the broodstock is eating this, but you are losing culture. And what I want to mention more is that sometimes we are forgetting that algae culture belongs to aquaculture. And basic principles of aquaculture are to know your species that you are farming. I told we use it in hatcheries, but as we need to know which environmental parameters are necessary for our fish or bivalve, it is same. This is live organism, algae also, so we need to know their optimal conditions for growth, what they want. We need to know their physiology. And why I put this has nothing to do with algae, but algae culture started and growing very fast. First of all, we can see on this graph that is from 2020 that aquaculture started to grow. So means whole aquaculture sometimes in 1980, around 1985, actually until this, we had all aquaculture products, only small, some 10 million tons actually. And as aquaculture grew, algae culture also grew. So these are micro and microalgae, but this is the first FAO report where on the main graph we have also quantities of algae production, what is of course part of aquaculture. So this is now significant production of micro and microalgae. This is what I wanted to tell, because not to tell, but we need to have it in mind. When we see now some producers, commercial producers, and when we see how they work, for them it is not aquaculture, doesn't matter. The point is that they have not so many clue about algae, that are farming, about conditions that they have. They are not checking their water quality. And then what we are getting a lot of these things. And also hygiene is something, of course, in large scale cultures, you cannot have completely sterile production, but you need to know what you have and how to check this. So actually after Gabriel, I started and turned it to the beginning. What were criteria for algae species selection for aquaculture purposes? It was optimal nutrition value, especially amount of essential amino acids, high unsaturated fatty acids, vitamins, minerals, and pigments. This is also, we will talk later about circular economy, what we use, and we need to know which species has. But also, I have to mention that in different conditions, this chemical composition can be changed. For example, just Isophysis galbana farmed at different salinities got different percentages of fatty acids that is necessary if you are cultivating algae for biofuels, for example. Then it is not same if you have 1% of fatty acids or 70% in their composition. And it will depend on the farming condition. Then absence of toxins, convenient site and digestibility. This is something what we don't need for other purposes. Simple adaptation to standardized growing condition. This is not for aquaculture again, satisfactory growth rate and profitability of mass production. So when we came to this, actually some 30, 40, 50 years ago, we came to some 10 to 20 species, and these species, if you remember, I mentioned that some of them, like Hetocerus, Thalassiacera, and Skeletonema, were described and used in 1910. So we are still around the same species in aquaculture. Of course, that we are investigating and introducing some new. This is just an example, but example of still most used algae in aquaculture. What we need to know, it is cell volume. Why we need to know it in aquaculture? Because we need to calculate what is diet of algae. So we have algae, we need to know their density, and we need to know cell volumes to calculate how many liters of algae according to their density to give in diet. This is something what we don't need for another purposes, but again, we need to know how many of them we have and what we can got of some quantity of algae. And as I told, we will find in different papers different chemical composition. And what I can tell, this is just one author, what he found, for example, tetracelmis that has 6% of lipids. It will depend of conditions for cultivation conditions and environmental parameters. It could be also connected to the strains, but such variations in chemical composition will be produced by different environmental conditions. So all these tables I would take somehow like something approximative, and that should be checked in your own culture. What they need, all just these basic requirements for some optimal growth. For example, this in aquaculture that is used 80 to 24 degrees, temperature, salinity, if we are talking about marine algae, alkalinity, if we are in water hardness, if we talk about freshwater algae, then light, and light for smaller volumes that is mostly used in 100 to 200 lux, 1000 lux, and up to 10,000 lux for bigger volumes. Why this light is necessary? Because not we know why light is necessary, but the design of system should be such that to keep algae in suspension and to all of these algae that are in some cultured volume in contact or get some light and adequate quantities of light for their growing, and this is specifically connected to the design. These are their requirements, but from the design of system will depend how many light algae will get, pH, consumption of mineral salts, and we need to know what which salts or for each species should be maybe added, or which element. This is, for example, silicates for diatoms that should be added, what we use normally for years, what Valne and Villard solution. Of course, that this is expensive for higher, for bigger producers or large-scale producers, but and there are many other recipes. I just put here how it look, what is in Villard, and a lot of recipes how to prepare it. So if it is not possible to buy commercial solution, we can go to preparation or to buy all elements that are entering into this solution. So I'll not tell only Valne, only Gillard, and what is important for this, if we are mixing medium for aquaculture, to sterilize it. So we need to know that, and then to use these principles in larger scales as much as possible, and where is it possible. So these are again conditions. So about algae growth, we all know this very well. and what are stages of algal growth. But the point is that we are again, we come again to chemical composition. Chemical composition of algae is not same in all these phases. So if we are talking about aquaculture, then we use this third stage or phase, just beginning of stationary phase of algae. Why we are using this? Because of nutritive value is best in this period. This is what was proved in different papers on different algae during examination. So if culture is old, we all know that it is not good and that losing some components of chemical composition. About this environmental factor, when we show algae growth, this is just an example how environmental conditions can influence algae growth. So what do we have? We want to have this, or stationary phase means highest number of cells that we have in culture. It will depend of environmental conditions of the system and different things, but here you can see only this is experiment what we did on Cylindrotheca clostridium algae that was examined for aquaculture before some 10 or 20 years. This is these are our results. So we isolated it from Adriatic Sea and started to farm. Cylindrotheca is very good for aquaculture, but this what we found that it is toxic. Some metabolic products are toxic to larvae, not for broodstock. So we could use, and it worked very well for oysters broodstock. Later on, we worked also on clams in the hatchery. We got gonadal maturation, everything was good. Not only with this, it is a mixture, and usually you have to use a few flagellates and diatoms if you want to give them good feed and to succeed in reproduction. And so this Cylindrotheca, when we tested it, so we got these results what were important for us, but also we tried different salinities, 15, 25, and 38. And what we got is that Cylindrotheca growth, we got stationary phase under the same conditions on 15 ppt of salinity or PSU. So it means that our culture, just with changing one parameter, can be significantly changed on, or that we can farm more algae in the same volume. Then some additional conditions that are necessary to assure this is enough space, though what is known, then to separate some invasive species like Tetraselmices, and that we need to take care that algae requires application of sterile conditions, what means sterile utensils, equipment, hands, space, everything, and we have to think about it all the time. So this is something what we will find in all guides. This is how to start algae cultivation from clear monoculture. Then we will use starter culture, after that intermediate scale, and larger volumes. It could be, this is just, we will tell that it is more than 50 liters. While these small volumes are used, actually they are used because it is for hatcheries or for aquaculture, it is much easier to use cylinder or bags for farming because it is cleaner. And you finish, you don't have continuous culture, you just finish your last biggest volume and you sterilize everything. So how is it farmed? There are different recipes, but usually ratio is 1:5 or starter culture, then volume of filtered water. In this case, when I'm talking more about seawater, then volume of water that is filtered, additionally chlorinated and dechlorinated. Now we can talk about different disinfectants in aquaculture or in algae culture. Someone would tell that if this water pass UV, that it is enough. I don't know, but what time or
No.
Okay.
We still have time.
okay. So there are different opinions. My opinion is double sterilization is the best one. And it is after UV, we are going in the bag before we start, or in any vessel, before we start with cultivation, with chlorination and dechlorination. Why? Because you are getting sterile conditions. And even in industrial, for the industrial purposes, for other kinds of ways of algae use, not only for aquaculture, I think again, smaller volumes should be double sterilized. These are, we didn't have problems when we were doing this. And now chlorine. Someone used hydrogen peroxide, and it was used also in the history. And everybody comes at the end to chlorine. Chlorine could be neutralized, if not with sodium or potassium thiosulfate, then with air, but then we need longer aeration. So because it will evaporate. And then for growth, so nutrient medium, these are protocols. I'm just mentioning this that are used more often now. Necton has, we have a lot of different commercial, I told you, feed for algae. You give it according to protocol. This is example for Gillard F2 medium, 1 gram per 10 liters of water. Then what we need to ensure air supply. So at least this air should be filtered somehow, at least for smaller culture. Until intermediate culture, we have antibacterial filters, and this is something what is suggestion. Of course, that if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Aeration also to keep them in suspension, to be in touch with light, or to each algae in the suspension get some light. Optimal temperature for that, as I told, silicium. Then every 7 to 14 days, a certain volume of algae is displayed in the larger volumes, or I told you approximately ratio is that we use 1:5. Algae concentration should be examined and counted daily. This is what I told that they were in history, and this is what we need to know when we farm it. First of all, we need to know in aquaculture to calculate quantity of feed that we will give to algae. Second thing is, if you use algae for anything else, this contamination or these conditions can change your final product. So Alena asked previously what are quality conditions. These are, one is a food safety requirement if they are for food safety. There are lipids if you are going to biodiesel. So there are different parameters, but actually if you have contamination, you don't have clear culture. Even if it is contaminated with three different species of algae, then you don't know what do you have. Not only for shellfish diet, but how to contaminate what is your raw material for biofuel, because you don't know chemical composition. And this is necessary to keep in mind. And then what I would tell that it is necessary to pay specific attention to sanitary conditions, and every variation can result in lower nutritive value. And okay, these are our photos. What does mean to check your culture every day? It means microscopically. Okay, we told now we have flow cytometers, we have a lot of things, but when we are talking about industry and our algae growers for any purpose, then they will not, they don't have handy probe to measure oxygen, pH, many of them, temperature, so they don't have this data. And how to know where they are going, and how to tell them, okay, you can use liquid fluid cytometry. It is not possible. This what is easiest way and maybe cheapest way is first to start with basic things. Someone can start from fluid cytometry, but I think that every person needs to know these basic conditions for algae farming, how to calculate algae or count algae on hemocytometer, how to examine its culture. These farmers, for them, it is not important to know, to detect what is contaminant. This is what we are doing now. But the point is to see that they don't have clear culture, that they have some contaminant, and then to ask for help. And it is good to know until which environmental conditions they got it. And when I'm about food, or when I was talking about media, many of them are saving media. Okay, this is or the rest of media after filtration of algae. This is something what is saving money. I told that as I am veterinarian and have some experience in algae farming, I'm not for so long continuous cultures, but okay, they exist. And but if you use this medium or rest of the medium, then you need to know its chemical composition. This is first. This is I think main driver of problems in large-scale cultures, because you have no idea, you are adding new medium, but you don't know what was previously there. And then you get something what is not correct, what will attract some parasites or other contaminants. This is according to my opinion. So even I wouldn't suggest for farmers that they doesn't have own laboratory with experienced workers. I wouldn't tell scientists to use anything else except this, because it's easiest and cheapest. And actually they need to know because they are bases. And what we saw then also many farmers doesn't have protocols. Basis is to have protocol for each step of the work. Here are just few examples. Entering the room. So allowed for personnel working with algae. If not, especially when you have starter culture, intermediate culture, it is interesting. Algae has different colors. It is funny for people from accounting department, for everybody. And then if you allow them to come there to touch this, you can forget your culture. Then all the entrance, at the entrance pass this barrier. Check the temperature of the room, whether the air conditions and all the lights are working. Check with the naked eye general conditions of algae. Then you will experience that you have problems even with ice. Wash your hands with soap and water, and use disposable paper towel. Then before you start to work with algae, disinfect your hands with alcohol or something else. I know that people doesn't like especially alcohol, but this is something that is good. Don't touch any bag, any Erlenmeyer glass, anything without previous sterilization of your hand. Then example of protocol for washing glass bottles or Erlenmeyer flags. I'm not read this all, but this is important. For example, you wash it properly, you disinfect it, you sterilize it, and after that you don't close your Erlenmeyer flags with aluminum foil or something that will keep it sterile. No, it will not work. This is what we are using also at home when you are preparing some marmalades or something. We use same things. Otherwise, it would be contaminated. So if it is just storage, it was disinfected, but in the air you have something. You can have HEPA filters, or I don't know, in your room, but still there it is possible. Open the window, open the door, and something will come from the air, and we will have contamination from the start. So then. Example of a protocol for fertilized marine water preparation, how to prepare it, and this is what I told about UV lamp. So also, what do you need to know? And every worker, every person that works with algae, okay, well, if we are working with the sterilization with UV, then we need to know that UV has some limited hours of work, and we have to evident how many works this one worked, and again, when it is in your glass bag, this water should be again chlorinated and dechlorinated, and then we can add medium. What is the best to sterilize or pasteurize the medium again? And then this is how we can keep. So these are some basic actually health management practices. This is what I wanted for this first part.
Thank you,
Okay,
Anna.
thank you.
Thank you very much. Nice presentation. Maybe there are some questions for Anna. So
Yes.
Jeremiah, have a question. We can 5 more minutes and after questions, please come out to the backyard. You will see we serve coffee break and technique. See you.
Anna, thank you for the lecture. I started my work as a photosynthetic researcher, and I did all of this all the sterile and everything. Then I came to our lab now, and I almost had a heart attack. And I said, this is not going to work.
Yeah, this is.
But it works. That is my point. It works, and although I still, sterilize and everything, but these cultures, well, I'm not talking now about specific strains, but these more resilient cultures, they just grow. You know, you have to take some precautions, but when you are thinking about industry, you know, and you will talk about circular economy later, you have to have some calculations, you know, about energy, about costs, and what the people will really do. And my question is, do you have some in-between protocol that will work also in industry? Because I don't see them, you know, following so strict regulations.
Look, I told you for bigger volumes or large scale culture, I think that design is most important, and I told to go with the intermediate culture with this. And also what I know, yes, you are right. When I was working only in lab, or later first we started, or Jura started this our algae production, and then we got one student of us. Or our student, and we three, it's okay. But when you have more personnel in the lab, then you have to take such care, because you have got contamination. After vacation, problems start. If some of us goes there, a problem starts. So you need to talk about these precautionary measures, and you can avoid something when you know, or when I know what would happen, or don't touch only this culture, then wash your hand. Today I will work with this, and you can jump over some steps. But when you have workers and many workers in this, no. But for bigger culture, for bigger cultures, look, this is again, you have to check your culture. Just take care of cleanliness of workers. There are then media that is used, and what I saw when you check some photos on the internet, for example, photobioreactors. I am susceptible to dead ends. To the design of photobioreactors, no dead ends, good circulation, good aeration. This is maybe the biggest problem. Then, and this media that is used after filtration again. And this is something what should be somehow sterilized, at least some UV, something maybe Jura can have better ideas for this design, but actually it should be. I am, as I am veterinarian, I am in this health management, but look, it should be. You see that there is a problem, and you can see that if it cannot be cleaned completely, at least after 3 passages of the same media, it is not only problem. So one problem is that you don't know what is chemical composition of this, and second, this organic matter that is there and shouldn't be there. So find a way how to clean it.
Yeah, you mentioned that you're a veterinarian,
As you are.
and you're thinking from that point of view. I wanted to ask you about possible use of some chemicals in control in algal production. Is it
You
is
mean
it applicable like from fish production?
pesticides or what?
No,
Chemicals?
I mean like for
Fungicides?
Yes, like I don't know, in fish production, like Bronopol, like
When you look,
green.
if you will use it, Maya maybe can tell more about it, and this is discussion about pesticides. So when you are veterinarian, you know that there is a time of carenza. So Then if we use it for hatcheries, no, what are you going to kill larvae? If it is for food, depending on carenza, and there are some that are possible for sure. And this is what, how to keep your large scale culture to survive, it's, especially when it is on open area. But again, we have food regulations, what can be and what can be used in algae. And antibiotics, so you know what is with antibiotics, it is better or not, and antibiotic residues are not supposed to be there. Are they? We
Just
don't-
a curiosity, but
Yes.
quick, how do you manage the chlorine now? Because you wash a lot of time with chlorine and everything. So, in an industrial scale, it's impossible. Absolutely impossible to use chlorine, at least if you don't have to plan for manage the chlorine. In your case?
In our case, chlorine will evaporate if you use aeration.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
So it is possible.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Anna. You might like to take your jacket. It's not very warm outside, so.